I want to give a sense of the fact that how we view dreams is really very similar to how people all over the world think of them and use them. I also want to give a better context for the studies that we're going to be looking at a little later in the quarter. First of all, everywhere in the world, people do think that dreams have meaning. At least certain dreams have meaning, and we'll see that most people in the world make a distinction between big dreams, meaning important dreams, and little dreams, dreams that are just piffle, that are everyday, that are trivial, that are minor. In fact, one of the theorists we'll be looking at, Carl Jung, J-U-N-G, makes that very kind of distinction himself. Furthermore, there are usually specialists in the interpretation of dreams in many cultures in the world, including ours. These people were called shamans, and I think of them as the first psychoanalysts. The shaman was the person that you came to if you had some kind of illness, if you were worried about something in your future. And very often the shaman would make the diagnosis on the basis of a dream, often his or her dream when they dove into the world of spirituality through their dreams. But sometimes using the dreams of the patient or client themselves. For us, of course, the modern day shamans are called psychoanalysts. We go to them when we have certain kinds of problems, and many of them, at least in the past, not as much as they used to, use dreams to understand more about us. Now, where we differ from other people's is that we think dreams have personal or psychological meaning, whereas most people in the world think dreams have spiritual or prophetic kinds of meaning. Okay, generalizations like that aside, when are dreams important for human beings? And the basic answer is, it's when they have big concerns, big worries, big crises. And so the way I'd put it is that dreams are important at times of crisis and transition. And that's true for both individuals and at the cultural level. And there I would add that for most human beings, a transition has the elements of a crisis. It stirs up anxieties as we move into a new state, whether it's from youth to adulthood, singlehood to marriage, or whatever it may be. Well, let's first of all look at this individual level. And there's 4 important times for dreams. 4 important times for dreams. First, perhaps foremost, or most generally, at times of physical illness. Because for most peoples in the world, physical illness is caused by malevolent spirits or personal wrongdoing. And there's a certain way in which we do the same thing. We used to talk about psychosomatic illnesses that were due to anger or tension or whatever it may be. We're talking about, in that sense, malevolent spirits causing physical illness. And of course, as I've already said, shamans use dreams then to make diagnoses and to prescribe cures. And that is very akin to the 20th century. Secondly, we use dreams, or dreams are important at times of personal or family crisis. Just a couple years ago, I had a student in this class who did a paper in which she talked about how dreams became important in her life. And the point was that at a very tense time in her adolescence, when her family was just going through a lot of difficulties, separation, denial, and so on, she started to have horrible dreams. And these horrible dreams drove her to go to bookstores looking for information about dreams, to go to workshops on dreams, and finally to write down her dreams as a way of trying to master them for all of the upset that they were causing her. A third time that dreams become very important for individuals, and this fits with the generalization I made just a few minutes ago, is when we make a transition from youth to adulthood. And of all the transitions in an individual life, it's the one from youth to adulthood that is most often involved with dreams. Often, in many societies, one must have a big dream to decide on one's profession. That is, should one be a warrior, should one be a shaman, should one be this or that. And indeed, especially for shamanism, it's important to have had the right dreams. Now, because big dreams are so important at this particular time in life, there have been developed all kinds of ways to try to induce them. Different cultures use one or more of these methods. First and most importantly, the person is usually socially isolated. They're sent to the desert or to the jungle. They're put in a secluded dwelling. Added to this social isolation, there may be sleep deprivation. Keep them awake all the time, yell at them, harass them, insist they stay awake, that they tell stories. And what that does is to create a heightened state of tension in which they believe dreams are more likely to occur. Another way of inducing these big dreams is to fast, to go without food and water. And thirdly, the use of a hallucinogen of one kind or another is done in some societies. And as I say, all of these factors are thought to enhance the likelihood of one of these necessary dreams. Well, there's a fourth time when dreams become important to the life of an individual. And that's when a loved one is about to die or does die. Dreams are important at this time in one of two different kinds of ways. First, the person may have a dream that a person, a loved one, dies shortly before it happens. This is a very eerie and frightening dream for many people. They wake up very disturbed. They immediately call on the telephone to the particular loved one. This kind of dream is one of the major reasons why people believe in telepathy, which means thought transference by parapsychological, beyond the usual kinds of means. It's also why they believe in precognition, which means knowing the future before it happens. Now, stepping back for a minute to talk a little about telepathy and parapsychology, when people are asked if they have had a psychic experience, maybe half of them will say yes, and as many as 50 to 60% of those who say yes say that this psychic experience, this telepathic experience, happened in a dream. And that dream very often involves the death or the illness or the serious injury of a loved one. So, from that we can see right from the start why dreams can seem important to people if, after all, they predict the future, if they predict deaths, illnesses, and injuries. Now, the second type of relationship between dreams and death involves the appearance of a deceased loved one in our dreams. He or she appears alive and well. We are shocked or perhaps overjoyed. They seem so real. It seems to be a form of denial of the person's death. And people wake up from such dreams, as I say, either amazed or shocked, sometimes very frightened. Sometimes later, after that kind of a dream, longer time after the person has been dead, the person may appear in dreams and say to the dreamer that, well, it was all for the best, I'm doing fine, don't worry about me. And those kinds of dreams, those resolution kinds of dreams are often very satisfying to the dreamer. Now, as we're going to see later, when we study dream content, in a section of the Green Reader, there is we'll see there's somewhat of a pattern or a sequence to dreams about a deceased person. We're going to see that we go from these dreams where they're alive and we're shocked to dreams where they give us advice or tell us they're okay, and then thirdly they may end up giving us advice in still later dreams. The point for now is that the process of dealing with the death of a loved one sometimes involves dreams, and that's another reason why dreams are important. Indeed, some of these dreams are very moving. They're among the most moving dreams I've ever read, and you will read some of them in the Green Reader. Okay, so much then for when dreams are important in the lives of individuals. As we're showing you on the insert, repeating, dreams are important for an individual in times of illness, in times of personal crisis, in times of transition from youth to adulthood, and when a loved one dies. Now let us turn to when dreams figure to be important at the cultural level. Now first, and following from what I just said about the appearance of deceased loved ones in dreams, in other words, that's the connection between the personal and cultural level, dreams are one factor in the worldwide belief in a soul that is separable from the body. And this was a point that was made by the founder of anthropology, a man named Edmund Tyler, back in the 19th century. That is, dreams show us that the person is still alive as a spirit. And therefore, it is evidence for a soul. Now, as I've implied by putting up that a 1, there are many reasons for the belief in a separable soul. Basically, it explains the difference between an alive and a dead person in terms of its warmth, its breathing, and so on, its qualities of emotion and feeling. The qualities of a soul, generally speaking, are those that are missing or gone when a person dies. In that sense, it's a theoretical answer to the mystery of death. Second, of course, the idea of a soul helps us to deal with the worldwide fear of death. It's a denial of death in that sense, because the person lives on as a spirit. We miss loved ones when they die. We also fear death for ourselves. Now, that's only half the picture in our feelings about death, that we miss the person and we fear it for ourselves. Because when we look at fears and fantasies about death, it also seems that we often feel guilty about the death of a loved one. We can often blame ourselves. We can say we did not do enough to save them. We did not take enough time to comfort them towards the end. We did not have a chance to say goodbye to them. And once again, referring to this class, just 2 or 3 years ago I had a student in here who wrote about a very moving and upsetting dream she had of this nature. She would have a dream in which she would see her deceased grandmother, and she would feel very, very afraid because she felt guilty about the fact that she had not had more time to spend with her grandmother when she was dying. She felt that she had ignored the evidence that this illness was going to be a fatal one, a final one, and hence her guilt. Beyond that, though, sometimes we have hostility towards the deceased loved one as well as love. We have had anger towards that person in the past, or even, in some cases, we're angry that the person died. The person died and left us behind. They deserted us. And this happens to many widows in studies, clinical studies that have been done. I shouldn't say many, but a certain percentage. And what happens is we then feel guilty about our anger. And that is what makes spirits dangerous, and it's what can then create nightmares. In other words, that's what makes the dream that the student in the class had about her grandmother being frightening in these dreams, is that she felt very guilty towards this grandma, and felt that grandma may be angry towards her for not giving her more attention at the very end. And that leads to a situation then, of course, where we have to propitiate the dead. We have to honor them. We have to make sacrifices to them. Not only because we love them, but because we're angry with them sometimes and hostile towards them sometimes. Well, in a certain way, that gets into human psychology in general, and this is a course in which I've said we're going to focus on dreams and cognition. But the point for now is that dreams are involved in these complex feelings about death and the spiritual world. But for now, I don't want to go into it any further. I only want to give you the idea that souls in the spirit world are not only about positive feelings or about sadness, that they can be about negative feelings as well, and hence dreams can be very negative and complicated as well. As I say, this relates to dreams because the most common theory of dreams historically and cross-culturally is that dreams are the wanderings of the soul at night. This involves both our soul wandering about and other souls coming to us or meeting with us. Dreams, then, I'm saying, are linked with beliefs about a spiritual world and about death. And that is one big reason why they can often be so important. Let me now give evidence of this at a little more mundane level, so to speak. Make this point by turning to a study of what types of societies have had the greatest emphasis on dreams. And here I'm thinking of what are variously called pre-industrial, pre-literate, and traditional kinds of societies. Small hunting and gathering societies, small agricultural societies. This study leads us to a generalization about when dreams have become very important in world history, as you'll see. Well, in this particular study, what the anthropologist did, and it was done by an anthropologist, he drew together all the materials from hundreds of cultures that anthropologists have studied, and he looked at what they told us about dreams. And he made a scale of practices using dreams. It had 7 items on it. That won't be on the test. That won't be on the test. But 4 of those items did correlate quite closely with each other. That is, if you did one, you were likely to do the other 3. What were those 4 items? Well, first of all, supernaturals or spirits are said to appear in dreams and to give power to the dreamer, particularly, of course, to a shaman. Secondly, shamans use their own dreams in their role in the society. Thirdly, you have to have certain kinds of dreams to assume certain roles, the kind of business I was talking about earlier about the transition to youth, from youth to adulthood. And finally, fourthly, the society uses special techniques to induce dreams of the kind that I was talking about before: isolation, fasting, drugs, and so on. What did he find? The main finding is this: 80% of the hunting and gathering societies in his sample use dreams in important ways. 80%. They use the dreams to deal with illness, to predict the weather, to find game. However, by contrast, only 20% of the settled agricultural societies use dreams in important ways. And this led the anthropologist to a conclusion. Dreams are important when there is uncertainty, and in particular uncertainty of food supply. And that is when the spirit world has to be called upon for help. That's when there's a need for a magical helper, a spirit familiar, a tiger or a kangaroo that's friendly to you, the spirit of them that has adopted you, to help. And of course, that ties us right back to dreams. Okay, now I want to turn to a bigger generalization. That is, that this work on uncertainty in hunting and gathering societies, or the suggestion there's more uncertainty in hunting and gathering societies, and hence more emphasis on dreams, it leads to my final point on when dreams have been important at the cultural level. And that is in times when a culture is in great crisis due to an outside attack by its enemies. That is, when the culture is about to be overwhelmed, destroyed, broken up. That's when dreams become very important. And what happens is that at this point, what anthropologists call a culture hero steps forward with a new spiritual doctrine. And he or she will say, they announce, that this new doctrine came to them from a dream or a series of dreams. A dream or a series of dreams. That is, somebody in that culture who, like the rest of the people, is experiencing this tension that they're about to be overwhelmed, such as happened for many Native American groups, all Native American groups basically, in the face of the Euro-Americans coming westward. And as these groups face this crisis, some one person will have, maybe a few, but will have a dream. And that dream, he or she will tell to everyone and say, in this dream a spirit told me we should do such and such. And that may be the origin of new religions. There's a book by an anthropologist named Weston La Barre. Weston La Barre, L-A, capital B-A-R-R-E, done about 1970 or 71. It's called The Ghost Dance. That title is taken from a Native American ritual or tradition in the last part of the 19th century. One of the groups in the West that was about to be overwhelmed, one of the culture heroes had dreams that told him to do this ghost dance. And it led to the development of a new way of coping with the society's problems. What La Barre claims in the ghost dance is that all the great religions had their origins in the dreams of culture heroes. And these dreams involved visits by spirits from the spiritual world. Once again, that is, we see the connection between dreams and souls. We see dreams being used as messages of great importance from some other world. Now, I can bring that point right to modern times, right to today, with a little item that appeared in a bulletin for Christian missionaries, talking about their work in Africa. This was in March of 1966. And they note that a strange, consistent pattern seems to be developing in the conversion of Muslims in Africa to Christianity. Many are having dreams that often involve an image of Christ or some message from Him. Some Muslims report having the same dream while others share more unique variations. Same dream meaning they all have just about the same one. And the point I want to emphasize is to you that having that dream, given our cultural beliefs about dreams coming from some other world, from some other place, being tied to the spirit, that dream is confirmation that they ought to convert for the individual and for the Christian missionaries. Now, at that point, then, we can see how dreams can become very important culturally. Now, we may sit back as sociologists or secular humanists or psychologists and say, well, the person at that point probably wanted to convert. Or maybe we would say the person felt a social pressure to convert under the circumstances. But the important point is that the way they psychologically processed or came to the realization or justified the conversion was through a dream. Now here I also need to say that dreams are closely related in situations like this, that is times of cultural crisis, closely related to visions, hallucinations, things like that. So whether the person was actually fully asleep and having a dream as we know it, as typically mundane everyday dreams, or whether they were half sleep deprived, maybe fasting, and then had a dream in a more fugue-like or halfway state, that's an open kind of question. Well, all this leads me to a general conclusion. That is, for both individuals and cultures, dreams are a phenomenon of great importance in times of crisis and transition. And as I said, most transitions are perceived as crises by most human beings. And if you think of them, birth, going off to school, puberty to adulthood, marriage, divorce, death, all times of anxiety, because something could certainly go wrong. More generally, and here I'm switching to the clinical theorists I'm going to talk about in just a minute, that is, more generally for Freud and for Jung, the world of the sacred is the world of the unconscious. That is, what other societies see as the spiritual world, we, as 20th century Americans, following basically the lead of Freud and Jung, whose work is pervasive in the culture, We see dreams as coming from an other world too, but that is the world of the unconscious, something that's separate from our awareness and self-control. The point is that we all live in a rather mundane world, the everyday world, the day-to-day world. And we can get along all right in that world. It's for the unconscious world, the scary stuff, that special rituals are needed. That's why we see the human psyche in its most depth in religion, in initiation rites, including fraternity and sorority initiation rites, to bring it close to your age group, if not right here to the campus, and, of course, in other sacred ceremonies. That is, religion, initiation rites, other sacred ceremonies reveal a great deal about our psyches. But wherever there's the unconscious, there's anxiety, and the bridge to that unconscious is the dream. That is, between the unconscious and culture, there stands dreams. And here I might then make a little point about myths. Myths, from this point of view, are dreams that have been told and retold. So if I have this amazing dream that just stuns me, and I go and tell it to people, if that dream resonates with dreams they had, that gradually gets molded to something that we have as a common belief in our society. That is, we have a myth, a story that's really based on dreams. And one particular overly Freudian anthropologist, at least for your taste, a man named de Giza Roheim, R-O-H-E-I-M, he wrote a book called The Gates of the Dream, The Gates of the Dream, in the early 1950s, in which he tried to analyze all the different kinds of myths around the world in terms of different kinds of dreams. Well, how does this relate to us? How does this relate to today? In two ways, of course. First, we too go through crises and transitions, and we too give them special attention through dreams. And that's what I mean when I said that the psychoanalysts are modern-day shamans. Second, this relates to us, and this is more distant, it relates to us because these ideas were believed in European cultural tradition until the time of the great Greek philosophers. It was only then that our philosophical ancestors abandoned the sole theory of dreaming for the one that is held by present-day psychology. That is, our definition of dreams, our conception of dreams, go back to the great Greek philosopher. And that is that dreams are simply a form of thinking during sleep. A form of thinking during sleep. Now, even though we abandoned the sole theory of dreaming, we did not abandon the theory that dreams have a profound or deeper meaning that must be uncovered by experts in interpreting dreams. That we retained, and that's why that's the bridge then to our interest in the ideas of people like Freud and Jung. What we did was alter that part of the theory about dreams that have meaning. We simply altered it to say that dreams have personal meaning, not spiritual or cultural meaning. They no longer told us about the other world, but instead about the unconscious mind. They no longer told us about our future, about the cultural future, through prophecy, but instead they told us about our personal past and our personal present. That is, they are still thought to reveal deep secrets. They are keys to the mystery of life, we believe, because they are so mysterious themselves. That is, they are so real, they seem to come from nowhere. We feel no control over them whatsoever, or at least most of us don't most of the time. And that gives them this mysterious quality and links them to other mysterious events. So what I'm trying to say with that point is modern theorists that we often give credit to for forcing our attention on this and that, all they really do is ride on the top of and make use of far deeper shared cultural meanings and far deeper personal feeling. They didn't create our fascination with dreams. They only embroider on that fascination. What I want to do now is to look at dreams in Western history. I want to make 3 points about the distant past, that is, pre-20th century. First, one I've already made, is that we branched off from other peoples of the world with the ancient Greek philosophers. They were the ones that had a lot of very subtle and interesting things to say about dreams. In fact, Plato's theory was very, very similar to Freud's, or more correctly put, Freud followed Plato. Same way, Aristotle had his own little slightly different theory, and it's much closer to Jung's. So Jung is Aristotelian, and Freud is a Platonist, we could very easily say. That's then the first point, that theoretically the great advances were made by the ancient Greeks that are so famous in all of your different courses. And in fact, not too much progress was made theoretically beyond the point they reached until the 20th century. In between the ancient Greeks and the 20th century, 2 other things happened. First of all, the great religious traditions all found ways to fit dreams into their general views. And some of them, of course, did use dreams. Now, there are many scholarly books on this issue. Dreams in this tradition, dreams in another tradition, and so on. This is something that may or may not be of interest to you. If you're interested in dreams generally, then you might find it interesting. If you're interested in the psychology of dreams, then you would find it of less use. And of course, these religious traditions always had as their ulterior motive in this work using dreams to further the religion, showing how dreams, in fact, and thoughts about dreams were compatible with that particular religion. The other thing that happened in this long time span between the ancient Greeks and the 20th century was the development of code books, or dream symbol books. And this is attributed to a man whose name you'll see on the insert, a man named Artemidorus. He was a physician of the 2nd century BC in Italy. And he really did a lot of fine work on dreams. He wrote 5 different books. His book is 5 parts, 5 volumes on dreams. But for our purposes, what's important about him is that his work is the basis for all the modern day code books. That is, if you go to the drugstore, the checkout stand, and they have a little book on what your dream means, and there are lots of such little books, they'll say if you dream of money it means this, if you dream of food it means that, and so on. Number so-and-so means this, or dreaming this means you should play a certain number in the lottery. Those books all can be traced back to Artemidorus. Indeed, his work on dreams was one of the first books that was printed when the printing press was invented. And then all the little books that followed, here I'm repeating myself, I recognize, are really takeoffs on his particular book. And there's an unbroken line back to his work. And that, shockingly enough, brings us right square to the 20th century. In other words, that was a quick trip through history. More seriously, what I want to really emphasize is the 5 eras of dream research in the 20th century. And then I want to talk a little about each of them. That is, what I want to say to you is that dream research, modern thinking about dreams, has gone through 5 phases. Or put another way, it's had 5 new starts, 5 instigations that we have with us, more or less all of them today. It's the 4th of them that you grew up in, and it's the 5th of them and the 2nd of them, as we'll see, that we're going to emphasize in this particular course. What are the 5 eras of dream research, which you're now going to see on the insert? Well, first of all, there's the era I call the clinical era. This is the era that was started by Sigmund Freud with his magisterial book called The Interpretation of Dreams. Considered, whether it's right or wrong, one of the great books of the 20th century because it was conceptually so elegant, so thorough, so encompassing. Now we'll see later that nobody's really been able to test Freud's most important ideas about how dreams are formed, but nonetheless the book is important because it triggered so much thought. And you're going to read a shortened version of that book, one that he wrote shortly after he wrote the original book. The original book was called The Interpretation of Dreams, appeared in 1900, although it was actually, it has the date on it, 1900. It was actually published in 1899, but Freud said, put 1900 on it, otherwise it's history. And so he wanted that book to have 1900 on it. But in 1901, he wrote a little book called On Dreams, which you're going to find in the Blue Reader. And it's very short, but it gives the main thrust of his ideas. Freud's ideas about dreams, the point for now is simply this: they developed out of his work with patients. In the process of talking to patients, they began to tell him about dreams, and so he began to want to understand dreams. And that was the primary mode of dream research for the first 50 years of the 20th century, was to try to analyze dreams in the context of a therapeutic setting, in the relationship between a psychoanalyst or psychologist and his or her patient. That was the, or patients I should say, because at a certain point it got to be group work as well. Now also on the insert you can see that there are other names besides Freud's. All of these people are theorists who started out in some way working with Freud or Freud's work. That is, they were all originally Freudians, but they took their own separate paths for a wide variety of reasons, but most importantly because they all held to a little bit different view of human nature. And here we get to the point that again and again in your work in school, you're going to find that the different theories in soc or anthro or psych or whatever it may be, the rival theories are really manifestations of a few basic theories about the nature of human beings and society. So Freud had, as I already said, a Platonic view, which meant simply that there was in us irrational forces as well as rational forces, and they fought back and forth. Roughly that's the theory. Jung really didn't like that kind of a theory. He saw human beings more like an acorn that grows into an oak tree, that if you have the right soil, the right climate, the right water, your potential is very great. There's not necessarily inherent conflict within you. Next name you see is Erich Fromm. He's basically a Marxist. He puts his biggest emphasis on social structure, and so that leads him to interpret dreams differently in the clinical situation than does a Freudian or a Jungian. The next name you see there is a man named Fritz Perls, P-E-R-L-S, who had what he called a Gestalt theory. It was a theory that tried to talk about the dream as a whole, not just its particular elements. That is, Freud took dreams and broke them up into little pieces, little parts. Fritz felt that you had to look at the dream as a whole. And finally you see the name Boss, Medard Boss. He's a Swiss psychiatrist who first trained with Freud, then trained with Jung, and then went to India shortly after World War II, met a famous philosopher when he came back to Europe, and he became a phenomenologist, a particular kind of philosophic tradition. Well, the clinical tradition has given us many ideas, many insights, and many of the things that were claimed by clinicians on the basis of work with a relatively few patients have turned out to be more or less true. But the clinical tradition has probably played itself out. It has become very, very cultish in the sense you're a Freudian or a Jungian or whatever, and these groups don't change very much. In other words, what a Freudian says today is what a Freudian said a long time ago, and so on for the others. And that's really not the way science operates. Nobody could be that right about things. as you look at the other sciences or other parts of psychology, you see that ideas move, that we still revere works that came from the 19th century ideas, but we've often moved beyond them, refined them, had to discard some of them, and so on. So the clinical tradition has rigidified. But even more than that, the point is that in clinical work, you're always being retrospective. You can't really study causality. In other words, the general critique that psychologists make of clinical work holds for these dream theories as well. So to be fully convincing about dreams, it's necessary to move beyond the clinic, however fertile it was at one time, and maybe still is for a few people. We have to move on. Well, one of the ways that we moved on, the second era, is that of content analysis. I also call this the era of classroom research. And what happened very simply was that a psychologist who had been trained at Berkeley by the man after whom Tolman Hall is named, a man named Calvin Hall, who was a teacher of mine, as I may have said the first day, but in a dream, who can remember? The point is that Hall, trained as a behavior geneticist, really, an experimental psychologist, got interested in dreams. He got interested in the work of some of these Freudians and Neo-Freudians like Fromm that I've just mentioned. Fromm is often called a Neo-Freudian, even though he's also a Marxist. In any case, Calvin Hall said, how can I study dreams outside of a clinic? And he had the idea of asking people to write down their dreams. And out of that, he developed a huge collection of dreams, and he developed a system called content analysis by which he could classify the elements in those dreams. And it's something we're going to spend a fair amount of time on in this particular course. Well, Hall's work in dreams never caught on big in psychology for a number of reasons. But the important point I want to make now is that it was really overwhelmed by the third era, the third new start in dream research in the 20th century, and that was the era of laboratory dream research. In 1953, quite by accident, in a laboratory for the study of sleep at the University of Chicago, one of the leading experts on sleep since the 1920s, he and a student of his accidentally found that throughout the night, at very regular periods, we go into a stage of sleep, now called REM sleep, in which our brainwave patterns change, lots of other breathing rate changes and so on, and our eyes begin to flutter under our lids. And it was those eyelid flutters that they first noticed, and then went on from there to discover the rest of the phenomena. And they had the idea, maybe these REM periods, as they called them, maybe they're when we dream. And they awakened subjects during REM periods and then also during non-REM phases of sleep, and they did find a very strong correlation between dreams and REM sleep. Indeed, they felt there was a perfect correlation, and that caused a great deal of excitement for dream researchers. For the first time, there was a one-to-one relationship between a psychological event and a physiological event. And it led to a flurry of dream research, to the founding of laboratories, to large grants from the federal government. That's about when I came on the stream and was involved in some of that early research, along with Calvin Hall, who had lost interest in dreams until the laboratory findings became more important, and then he returned. Well, basically the laboratory era ended, and it ended because for several reasons, but the most important one was that the REM dream equation did not hold. That is, there were dreams from outside REM periods. There was no perfect relationship between a physiological state and dreaming. There was no, eye movements did not track dreams as was believed. And many other things that I'll talk about later and that you'll see on a video at a later point. And so by the 70s, the wind had gone out of the sails of dream research within the laboratory. Now at the same time, sleep research took off even more, and today there's a huge amount of money, a huge amount of research that goes on sleep. Advances are made. It's a very sophisticated, very neuroscience kind of work. But work in the dream lab just declined, and you're going to read that story by one of the most preeminent dream researchers of the laboratory era, a man named David Fowkes. That you'll find in the blue reader. Well, as the laboratory era declined, we saw the rise of what I call the Dreamwork Movement, the era of the Dreamwork Movement, which started out in the 70s and still exists in the present. The Dreamwork Movement builds very importantly on the laboratory era, in that that era, the lab era, had told us that dreams happen throughout the night, that they aren't just a reaction to upset or fever or whatever it may be, that they're consistent, regular, and so on. And that made dreams seem more profound and more important. The Dreamwork era, though, is basically New Age kind of things. It built on the human potential movement of the 60s. It tries to talk about sharing dreams, controlling dreams, enjoying dreams, and so on. It is not cooped up in the clinic. It is not just for experts. It's for everyone. There's an association that came out of this work called the Association for the Study of Dreams, and we'll be coming back to that as well. The Dreamwork movement has not been very scientific. It has not contributed a great deal, I believe, to our understanding of dreams. However, the Association for the Study of Dreams does sponsor a journal called Dreaming, available in our library, and there are often good papers in that journal. But I say that the Dreamwork movement has not been important for science, generally speaking, as a way of saying, as a way of transitioning to the fifth era, to the era that we're in now, at least in a university setting, and that's what I call the cognitive era. And it dates from 1985, very explicitly, I believe, through the work of this person I just mentioned, David Fouts, because in 1985 he wrote a book called Dreaming, a Cognitive Psychological Analysis, in which he went back and looked at all the cognitive literature and then applied it to his work on dreams. Most importantly, his work on children's dreams. We're going to see that that's really a landmark event when he studied children from 3 years to age 15 in the laboratory and awakened them and collected dreams, and found to his surprise that children under 5 don't recall many dreams from REM period, and they don't have very developed dreams. They have very simple static dreams for the most part. And Fouts made the point, dreaming is a cognitive achievement. We don't just automatically go out there and dream any more than we automatically go out there and think. And dreaming probably develops as a process coterminous with waking cognition. And today it's believed, and you'll see papers that relate to this in the Green Reader, today it's believed that dreaming is very similar to waking cognition. That is, that even more we're Aristotelians in the sense of dreaming is a form of thinking during sleep. Why are we in the cognitive era? And I'm going to close with this. Well, first of all, we're in the cognitive era because cognitive psychology generally has swept the field. It's replaced behaviorism. It's replaced the psychodynamic psychology that Freud and Jung developed, at least within the academy. But the second reason that it's a cognitive era is that the other eras in many ways really did fail. That is, there's nowhere else to go with the clinical stuff, and nobody has a dream lab anymore. So the laboratory era kind of ran itself out as well. Those two petered out. But the third reason, now the more positive reason, so to speak, is that the development of computers has really been helpful to the creation of this new way to go in the study of dreams, because you can store and send a lot of data, you can retrieve it, you can do a lot of things with it, including a spreadsheet for doing the coding of the Hall-Van de Castle system, that is Calvin Hall's content analysis system. It speeds up the work and makes it all the more accurate.